behalf of Extramural Lectures team of IIT Madras, welcome you to the 9th lecture of the EML series 2016-17. We have with us today Shri P. Chidambaram, the former Finance Minister of India, who will speak on the topic 25 years of reforms. Shri Chidambaram is a member of Parliament Rajya Sabha and a former Union Minister of Finance of India. He was a corporate lawyer and an important member of the last Congress-led government. He has also been the Home Minister in the wake of the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks. As a finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram brought discipline in the government spending and launched an ambitious tax reform program to tackle an unwieldy fiscal deficit. He did his MBA from Harvard Business School and practiced law in the Supreme Court and various high courts of India. We now request the Honorable Director in charge, Dr. Shri P., to welcome the guests with a flower bouquet. Thank you, sir. I now invite Shri Chidambaram to deliver his much-anticipated talk on 25 years of reforms.
Professor Shri, Professor Umakant Dash, faculty, and my young friends of the IIT. I'm grateful to you for inviting me to speak to you as part of your extramural activities. In a sense, it's an extramural activity for someone like me too. Usually I address only a court or parliament. And I sometimes get the feeling that neither in the court nor in parliament anybody's listening to you. We are here 25 years after reforms started. I'm glad that, except Professor Shri and his colleagues sitting in the first row, none of you appears to be over 25 years of age. The bulk of you are perhaps in your early 20s. How many of you have asked your parents what it was like 25 years ago? I have a granddaughter who will be 16. She has no clue when I tell her what it was 25 years ago. For example, did you know that students like me, when we were abroad, and I was abroad for 2 years, in all those 2 years, I did not, because I could not, make a single call home, nor receive a single call from home. Why? Because we had what is called a trunk call. You had to book a call, you have to dial 180. You will hear nothing for many hours. Then you have to dial 181 for assistance. You'll be told your call is in the queue, and then if you want to know exactly when your call will mature, you will call 188. And when you call 188, they will tell you your call is 64th in the queue, and she can't tell you when the call will mature. Now, obviously, every one of you who has a mobile phone can't even imagine that world when to talk to somebody in Delhi or in Boston or wherever, you had to wait for hours to get connected, and invariably you will not be connected. and the booking will lapse at 24 hours. If you wanted to travel by plane, Air India will tell you quite coolly, sir, you're 173 in the waiting list. The capacity of the plane was only 128. It was a very different world. You had a choice of cars. The choice was between an Ambassador and a Fiat. You had a choice of airplanes. The choice was between an Air India older model and an Air India new model. Most goods were not available in India. Most services were unheard of. We were a closed economy. And we thought that a closed economy offered us protection, offered us the space and the time to grow. And we built walls with the rest of the world. These were called tariff walls. Nothing could be imported unless you paid duties ranging from 100% to 300%. So nothing was imported. A closed economy, far from boosting growth, constrained growth. In the first 30 years, India grew by an average of about 3.5%. That is from 1950 to 1980. The population was growing at the same time by about 2.2% a year. So really there was very little growth in terms of per capita income or standard of life or the quality of life. Most people were poor. A large number of people are poor even today, but that kind of poverty and today's poverty are very different kinds of poverty. "25 years ago, we decided to open up. There were, of course, some tentative moves in the 1980s to open up India's economy, but these were half-hearted moves, and they were scotched by a stubborn, unchanging bureaucracy. The first time we really opened up was in 1991, and that, I can confess, was because it was triggered by an external crisis. Our reserves had run down to below $1 billion. We had barely 15 days worth of foreign exchange to meet our import requirements, and we were on the verge of default on our external loans, which is why we had to mortgage gold. Our credibility was so low that the mortgagee, the Bank of England, did not allow us to keep the gold in India. They insisted that we ship the gold to the vaults of the Bank of England, and actually we did. We loaded the gold on airplanes, and airplanes lifted the gold and secured it in the Bank of England. It's a different story that in a few years, we were able to redeem that gold and bring it back to India. Today, we have invested our gold with the IMF. Instead of borrowing from the IMF, technically, the IMF has borrowed from us. Now, what did reforms mean? What is the meaning of these reforms? Reforms simply meant that the state will take a step back and allow individuals, the private sector, to produce the goods and services that the people need. Production in an economy is not something mysterious. An economy produces goods or services. The more you produce, the more it is consumed, the wheels of economy keep moving faster, and it is that which brings about growth. And in an interlinked world, you don't have to produce only for yourself. You can produce them to meet the needs of others. And that means your market becomes wider. For example, our software companies don't produce software only for Indian people and Indian consumption. A potter in a village produces mud pots for the village and perhaps for a radius of about 5 kilometers around his village. Somebody who makes, say, pickles or jams or jellies, even in a village, can have a market, say, up to the nearest town. Somebody who produces cycles can have a market, say, even within 100 kilometers. Your software companies today do not regard India alone as the market. If they have a product or a service which has acceptability, say 10,000 kilometers away, your market then widens. You can then produce for the larger market. The larger your market, the greater your growth is. So what we decided in 1991 is, listen, what we have done so far has indeed brought us some benefits, but not to the extent that we wanted. Let us step back. Let us allow the private sector to produce goods and services which they can do. For example, why should the government of India produce cycles? We are a cycle corporation of India. Why should you produce scooters? We are a scooters India. We were producing all kinds of things. Why should you produce watches? You had HMT. It's bound to die. It has died because it can't stand up to competition. But there are some items where the state must step in and produce. These require massive investments, like the first steel plants. You had to step in and invest several thousand crores, which of course no private sector at that time could have mobilized to produce steel. So that is the beginning of liberalization. It is marked by a few key events. The first was open up trade, bring down these walls. These walls must be broken so that people can sell abroad and buy from abroad. India was a great maritime nation. Indian traders have gone as far as Myanmar, then Burma, Indonesia, Malaysia, and on this side, South Africa, what is now the Middle East, Arabia, and as far as Rome. Indians are natural traders. And therefore we said we must break down these walls, open up trade. That was the first reform that we did on the third night, fourth morning of July 1991. And then followed up with another set of reforms on August 13, 1991. The second major reform was de-license industry. We were licensing industry, fixing capacity, and punishing people if they produced one more than the fixed capacity. For example, cycle companies were punished for producing one cycle more than the capacity fixed for that cycle company. Actually, they should have been rewarded. with the same machine, with the same workforce, if your capacity was 100,000 cycles a year, if you produced 100,000 one cycle, you should have been rewarded. On the contrary, the state punished them. So we de-licensed industries, barring 9 or 10 industries, all licensing was abolished. That was the second major reform done on July 24, 1991. Then, of course, came the budget that day on the evening when Dr. Manmohan Singh announced major reforms right across the board. Now, obviously, this country has greatly benefited from those reforms. There is no question that our growth path, I mean, all of you are familiar with graphs. If on a graph, the growth path was a low graph, quite close to the axis. Now the growth path is much higher. It's like a satellite which is orbiting closer to the Earth and a satellite which is orbiting much far away from the Earth. Our growth path is no longer 3.5%. Our growth path is now 6% plus. In the last 33 years, including the 25 years I'm talking about, the trend rate of growth in India was 6.2%, twice as high as a trend rate in the first 30 years of India's independence. It means that we have virtually doubled our trend growth rate. The benefits are there for anyone to see. There are no shortages there, people have choice, quality is improved. You have a choice among cars, choice of sky cycles, choice of consumer goods. And as a result of that, there has been massive increase in employment. Today, we can say that we are among the fastest growing large economies of the world. Even if you don't believe the number 7.6, as I don't believe, even then, at 6% plus, we are among the fastest growing large economies of the world. Technology, especially communication technology, has completely changed the way people interact with each other. Even farmers today, or growers of vegetable, fruit, or anyone in any village is connected to any part of India, and if they make an effort, to any part of the world. President Barack Obama said something a couple of weeks ago in a special article that he wrote for The Economist, and I quote from that. Those who should be rising in defense of further reform too often ignore the progress we have made. Americans should debate how best to build on these rules, but denying that progress leaves us more vulnerable, not less so. We cannot deny the fact that we have made remarkable progress in the last 25 years, but at the same time, we must acknowledge that there is much to be done on the base that we have built over the last 25 years. And the rest of my lecture will be on what needs to be done. Now, when my government, the government of which I was a part, left office in 2014, we produced 263 million tons of food grains. Just contrast that with what happened in the late 1970s, when we imported food grains under a program financed by the US government called Public Law 480, which gave rise to that charming phrase, India was living from ship to mouth. When we left office, we had installed power capacity of 234,000 megawatts of power. It has since increased. 25 years ago, over one half of India did not have power. And pause there. What does that mean? One half of India did not have power means not that they did not have power that day, not that they did not have power the previous day. It means that that part of India, 50% of India, did not have power ever since human beings came into existence. They've never had power. And that continued until a few years ago. It continues even today. There are parts of India which are black. There is no power, which means for millennia they have not had power. Ever since electricity was discovered, they have not had power. When we left office, coal production was 554 million tons per year. What does that mean? Today, coal is not a constraint for producing power. Yes, it is a problem as far as environmental pollution is concerned, but it is not a constraint for producing power. We had built 389,578 kilometers of rural roads. What does that mean? It means that villages which had been completely unconnected with the rest of the world today are connected. A villager can travel from his village right round the year, because these are metal roads, right round the year to the nearby village or the nearby town. A remarkable transformation has come about. But where do we go from here? There are 10 areas where there's much work to be done. And this work will not be over in a year or 5 years or 10 years. It might not be over even in my lifetime. This work is continuing work. Firstly, we must always remember that we cannot live beyond our means. Yes, like individuals can borrow, nations can borrow. But the borrowing must be severely limited. Excessive borrowing burdens the next generation, the unborn generation. There is intergenerational inequity when you borrow more for today's consumption and burden the next generation. It also completely wrecks your financial discipline. So number one is that we must always keep in mind that the fiscal consolidation, fiscal balance is maintained. We made mistakes by borrowing too much. We did that in the 1970s and 80s. We landed ourselves in deep trouble. We did that again between 2009 and 2011, which landed us in trouble. But we should never again breach the limits of fiscal discipline. Secondly, we must also keep in mind the current account deficit. The world is integrated today. If you want to sell, if you want to buy, you can't do it in Indian rupees. You can only do it in foreign exchange. Until your currency becomes so strong that it becomes one of the reserve currencies of the world. But that's not likely to happen for many, many years. Which means that you must always earn foreign exchange for what you will need to import. India's balance, current account balance, is kept above the water because of the huge remittances that Indians make from abroad. On the one hand, Indians remit almost $50 to $60 billion a year. On the other hand, Indians, with their famous love for gold, export $50 to $60 billion to import gold. Those of you who are still attached to gold, my appeal to you would be, gold is nothing but a metal. It's like any other metal. It just shines a little more. while $50 to $16 billion come in by the dint of hard labor in the Middle East and in other countries, $50 to $16 billion goes out because we want to get gold. If we didn't import gold, we will never have a current account deficit at all. Be that as it may, it's not easy to tell everyone, give up your love for gold. But I think we should tamp down on our passion for gold. It's just another metal. It shines a little more than brass, but most often I can't see the distinction between brass and gold. The third is price stability. We cannot allow inflation to cross limits. Inflation is the worst tax on the poor. Inflation hits the rich man and the poor man alike. Inflation must be kept as low as possible. In a developing economy, there will be some inflation, but it must be kept as low as possible. We should never allow inflation to cross the 4% limit, which the former governor of the Reserve Bank said is all that India and Indians can tolerate. Next, we must do financial sector reforms. This is the area which is crying for attention. Government needs money for a number of things, and I'll deal with them presently. So does the private sector require money for investment. This money has to be mobilized. This can only be done if the financial sector remains well regulated and well functioning. Financial markets must function. Without financial markets, there cannot be intermediation of money. Some have money more than what they consume. Some need money more than what they have. There must be intermediation between the person who has money and the person who needs money. That intermediation so far has been done only by banks. But that's a very antiquated system. Yes, banks will act as intermediaries. They will take deposits and they will lend. But that is not enough for a country. You must have other markets that function. The stock market is a market. The commodities market is a market. The securities market is another market. The corporate bond market is another market. All these markets must function well so that there's intermediation between those who have money and those who need money. And that intermediators must be well regulated so that you don't have financial scams. That's an area that is crying for reform. The fifth is infrastructure. Our infrastructure is appalling. Just look at the road that brings us from the airport to the city. It is perhaps the worst approach road of any metropolitan city. It is the worst airport of any metropolitan city. The roof has fallen only 100 times so far. Why? We had 4 metropolitan cities. Bangalore and Hyderabad were added later. We gave a choice to 4 chief ministers. How do you want to rebuild the airports? Mumbai and Delhi chief ministers opted for privatization through a private-public partnership of a private developer and Airport Authority of India. The 2 chief ministers, hardly need to name them, Bengal and Tamil Nadu, chose the public sector. That is why the Chennai airport and the Kolkata airport are the 2 worst airports in the country, and Mumbai and Delhi have the best airports, among the best in the world. And then Hyderabad and Bangalore also have got excellent airports. Infrastructure is appalling in this country. You have roads without pavements. You have pavements with obstructions. Your railway track requires renewal. You require to build more seaports, more airports. Bridges have to be strengthened, widened. 2-lane roads have to be made 4-lane. 4-lane has to be made 6-lane. All this requires money. And we require to find mechanisms to improve the infrastructure. For example, the Golden Quadrilateral was built entirely by government under the EPC mode. Then we switched over to a PPP mode for building other roads. Some great roads were built, but that model has run into problems today. So we need to invent new models to build our infrastructure. The next is subsidies. We need to address this issue. Who should be subsidized and what should be subsidized? In a country with a large number of poor people, some subsidies are unavoidable. For example, food subsidies unavoidable. Education must be subsidized. Health must be subsidized. But these are absolute necessities for a decent life. But should you subsidize, say, higher education, except for a small number? Should you subsidize air transport? Should we subsidize many other products which are consumed by the well-to-do? These are questions which have to be answered by each generation, each government, having regard to the state of the nation. But there are limits to which things can be subsidized. And I have argued a good subsidy policy will say absolutely necessary subsidies to the absolutely deserving people, and no more. Then, of course, we come to the two major challenges that we will face. One is urbanization. Nothing can stop urbanization. If anybody is living in this world that people will continue to remain in villages and will be happy to remain in villages, he's living in a cuckoo world. That won't happen. People will move to cities. People will migrate to cities. People want to live together. And people want more and more services. These services are better provided in cities. For example, if you have a hamlet of 30 houses, to provide electricity to a hamlet of 30 houses is going to cost you a huge amount of money. But if those 30 families were in one multi-story building, it'll cost you a fraction to provide electricity or water or roads. So urbanization is inevitable. What we need to do is manage urbanization so that our cities don't become unlivable. Today our cities are becoming unlivable. Look at Delhi. Today all schools in Delhi are closed because the 2.5 SPM level is 40 times the safe limit. 40 times the safe limit. If you live in Delhi, doctors advise you not to go for your morning walk, not to do anything that is an exertion or an exercise, because you breathe in more SPM. Today the schools are closed, and maybe they will remain closed for a few more days. Our cities are becoming unlivable. Traffic in Chennai, traffic in Mumbai. We have terrible roads, terrible sanitation, terrible water supply. And therefore, we need to plan our cities, build new cities, so that one city does not become a magnet for everyone, build satellite cities, and improve the infrastructure in cities. You cannot stop urbanization, therefore you must know how to manage urbanization. And the last, of course, is skill development. Now, people no doubt want to live, but to live you have to work. To work, you must have skills. You are students of IIT, you have skills. You learn a number of skills. knowledge. But most people don't have any skills at all. If a child drops out at class 5, it has no skill. It does not even have the skill to read or write. The most basic skill is literacy and numeracy, ability to read, ability to count. That child does not have that skill. Most children today drop out at class 5, class 8, class 10. By the time you come to class 12, more than 50% of the children have dropped out. And of those who graduate in class 12, only 14% go to university. So all the rest must have skills, some skill or other, either a mental skill or what we call a hand skill. Otherwise, they will be useless citizens. These are the challenges that your generation will face. These challenges, let me assure you, are as grave as the challenges that we faced in 1991. In fact, what we did were the easy reforms. These are the more difficult reforms. What we did was simply undo the wrongs. You have to do the rights. Undoing the wrongs is pretty simple. Once you identify the wrong, you can undo the wrong. But identifying what is the right thing to do and doing it is more difficult. Now let me conclude by saying how does the state, that is the government, and the people share the responsibility for building a prosperous India. I have never believed that the government should simply exit. In fact, government cannot exit. Government must exist and be present in a very, very powerful presence. But where should government be present? Government should be present in collecting taxes. Paying taxes is a mark of civilization. No country can run without taxes. There can be only one collector of taxes, government. So government must become an efficient collector of taxes without oppressing the people. Today, government collects taxes, but I cannot say it is a very efficient collector of taxes. Yes, over the years, efficiency has improved. Technology and automation have helped. But we must become an efficient collector of taxes. Please remember, in income tax, over 90% of the taxes are paid by 0.7% of the assessable base. 0.7% of the assessable base. Which means 99.3% pay paltry amounts of tax. One of the reasons is the inequality, but that I will come to when I conclude. But more and more people must pay legitimate taxes. Take indirect taxes. If you have a cutoff of 1.5 crore as the turnover, 93% are below that cutoff threshold. Which means there is rampant tax evasion in this country, and government is not a very efficient collector of taxes. Number two, government must have a powerful presence in health and education. That is where your best civil servants must go. Your best civil servant today wants to go to the finance ministry, wants to go to the commerce ministry, wants to go to the external affairs ministry. He does not want to go to the education ministry or the health ministry. Why? Your best minds, in fact, the same thing applies to ministers. Minister wants to become finance minister, home minister, external affairs minister. He does not want to become health minister or education minister. Your best minds, your best ministers, your best civil servants, your best researchers must go into health and education. With so much deficiency, don't underestimate the revolution wrought by the public health system. It is the public health system the government hospital, the municipal hospital, the taluk hospital, the doctors there, underpaid, overworked, unsung, unhonored doctors who eliminated smallpox in this country, who eliminated plague in this country, who eliminated elephantiasis in this country, who eliminated Kala Azar in this country. We did not have Apollo, Fortis, Max, Rockland hospitals. All these endemic diseases were eliminated by the public health system of India. Nobody recognizes the work of those doctors. We must make public health what it is, public health. It is a public good. It is not a private good. Everybody must be able to access the best medical care. Why should a citizen pay for that? Yes, sometimes, yes, you may have to take a little money from the citizen. But access to basic medicine, access to secondary health care, even access to tertiary health care is a basic right of a human being. And only government can provide that. I'm completely disappointed that governments have taken a back seat, stepped back from providing the health care that these people need. And same thing applies to education. Please remember, a man like Sir C.V. Raman, a man like Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, were not products of these high-sounding institutions. They were products of district board school, products of government colleges, learnt in the local language, Tamil medium and Telugu medium. When I was in school, I paid 30 rupees a term. I paid 90 rupees for the whole year as fees. And that was the best high school in Chennai, the Madras Christian College School. Multiplied 10 times for inflation. Today, I would have paid 1,000 rupees in that school. But today we hear kindergarten, first standard, asking you to pay 20,000 per child per year. Education is being denied, quality education, basic good quality education is being denied to millions of children because the state has stepped back. And I condemn the states for stepping back. Both basic education and basic health care are the province of the state governments. The central government can provide money, but both the central government and the state governments deserve our condemnation for stepping back from health care and education. These are the areas where the government should be. Collecting taxes, education, health, and providing the infrastructure, which is again a public good. A road is a public good. A bridge is a public good. This is where government should be. Not making cycles and watches, which of course somebody else will make much better. The private sector must be allowed to produce practically every goods and services. And they will. Sheer competition will squeeze out the inefficient, and ultimately you will have a system where top quality goods and services are produced in this country. For example, when Mercedes-Benz first came to India, the chairman came to see me and said, Mr. Minister, do you think the Indian worker can make a car of the quality of a Benz? I said, why do you ask? He said, I saw your ambassador car. I mean, the welding is bad, the finishing is bad, the plating is bad. There's not even a balance. How do you make a Mercedes-Benz car? Can this worker make one? I said, why don't you do one thing? Take 100 of Indian workers, take them to Germany, make them work in your factory, train them, and tell me after 6 months whether he's as good as your German worker to make a Mercedes-Benz car. And that's precisely what Mercedes-Benz did. They took batches of Indian workers. In fact, I visited one of the Benz factories in Germany when I saw a whole batch of Indian workers working there. And today, the Mercedes-Benz car is 100% made in India and exported back to Germany, where it runs as the basic taxi in Germany. The government had a silly rule that ministers should only use a Maruti Suzuki car because it is an Indian car. And I said, how foolish are you? 100% of Honda is made in India, 100% of Ford is made in India. Why is that not an Indian car? Indian raw material, Indian worker, Indian engineer. Why is that not an Indian car? Then they woke up and said, yes, ministers can have either a Suzuki or a Ford or a Honda. I mean, this mindset. There's something foreign about it. The brand is foreign, the name is foreign, the product is Indian. Gillette blade, is it foreign or Indian? It is Indian. 100% of it is made in India today. Therefore, it's possible for the private sector to compete with the rest of the world, and they will. But both government and the private sector must guard against one thing, and that is where I will conclude my speech. Inequality is growing in this country, and it's growing at an alarming pace. Earlier, there was inequality. I'm not denying that. There was a certain relativity. It's growing all over the world, but it's growing in India. For example, in the US, a study showed that the average pay of a CEO, say 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, was 10 times the average pay of the shop floor worker. Today, it has increased to over 100 times. In India, that differential is getting wider and wider. The per capita income of India and the highest earner of India, highest average, the top 1%, that is growing at a tremendous pace. The Nobel Prize winner, Thomas Piketty, and I would urge you to read that book. His whole thesis is about the growing inequality in the world. If more wealth is created in this country, the incremental wealth cannot be appropriated by the top 1% of India. It must be more equitably shared. And one way of sharing the wealth is to raise the minimum wage in India. We must have a universal minimum wage. If I put in 8 years as a lawyer, if Professor Dash puts in 8 years as a professor, 8 hours as a professor, a doctor puts in 8 hours as a doctor, he earns enough to live a decent life. Why should a carpenter or a plumber who puts in the same 8 hours of work not earn enough to lead a decent life? Both have different skills. Those skills are valued differently, which is why the doctor, lawyer, professor earn more than the carpenter. But since I am putting 8 hours of honest work as a carpenter, why should I not have enough money to live a decent life? Why should I deny myself food, education, health care, clean water, a decent dwelling place? It's absolutely important to spread the message that India must move towards a universal basic minimum wage, which must be constantly corrected to take care of inflation and growth. There's no reason why anybody who puts in 8 hours of honest work should be denied the basic necessities of life. There are today a large number of people, a very large number of the working force, who puts in 8 hours of honest labor and do not have the basic necessities of life. That is the biggest challenge that your generation will face. It is the growing inequalities, the challenge that the world faces today, a challenge that the US faces, the richest country, the challenge that the poorest country faces, the challenge that every developing country faces, and India is no exception. And last but not the least, you must always guard against creeping regulations. As we go forward, there will be a backlash. There will be people who will tell you, no, we should go back and control. What is wrong with our laws? It is because too many people write too many laws. Too many people write too many rules. Each one makes his own contribution. And as a result of that, you have a complete nightmare situation. We made a bonfire. We made a bonfire of the import-export policy, famously called the Red Book, in 1991. There was an office, you won't believe it. Office was called Chief Controller of Imports and Exports. When I assumed office, the gentleman who was occupying the office was a gentleman named D.R. Mehta, a very fine gentleman, but completely out of tune with liberalization. He today does remarkable work in spreading the message of Jaipur foot in Rajasthan, a very fine human being. And I asked him, Mr. Mehta, I can understand why you are the Chief Controller of Imports. Pray tell me, why are you the Chief Controller of Exports? He had never thought about it. He had never thought why there should be a controller of exports. The more you export, the more you earn. I can understand you're limiting imports, but why are you limiting exports? Bureaucracy is the way of finding its way back. Creeping regulations. You'll have to constantly be careful. That is why it is a good policy to say every law must have a sunset clause. Every law must be mandatorily reviewed after 5 years. And if you don't find a usefulness for that law, the law must be allowed to die and Parliament must enact a new law. The challenges your generation will face are even greater challenges than my generation faced. It is the challenge of providing healthcare, education, infrastructure, and jobs to millions of people, the challenge of reducing inequality, the challenge of creating a more just, a more humane society, even while you build a richer and more prosperous society. We can be rich, we can be prosperous, but we must also become more just, more equal, and more humane. Thank you very much.
I now request our guest Shri Chidambaram to give away certificates to members of the previous EML team. This would be followed by the Q&A session. K.U. Vohra. Rohan Ajit. Sai Kiran GL. Amlan Gaurav. Mehul Soni. Akhil Reddy. K.M. Tej Kiran. Sharika Mahadevan. Basima P. Nikesh Navele. Nikhil Namburi. Henna. Harikrishnan Kaimal. Thank you, sir. I now invite EML strategist Tej Kiran to carry forward the question and answer session.
Hello, sir. Hello, everybody. We have collected a few questions from the students via online forms yesterday, and I'm here to ask some of them on behalf of the students. Sir, in your talk, you talked about the poverty in India being different before 91 and after 91. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Some people are apprehensive that inequality became more after the reforms.
Yes, in any developing country, when you introduce reforms, there will be early winners, and as a result of that, there will be losers. So inequality will increase. In fact, I spoke about it. Inequality has been aggravated by the reforms. Because only those who have skills, those who have capital, those who have access to technology, those who are connected with the world, they can take advantage of the reform. Naturally, they will move much faster. So relatively, inequality will increase. But when I said poverty was very different then and different now, what I meant is, in terms of numbers, more people were poor, not so many people are poor today. The poverty ratio was close to 50 to 60%. Today, whatever number you want to believe, clearly there has been a reduction of poverty by at least 20 to 30 percentage points. The worst number today is 30%, but earlier it was 60%. In the 10 years of UPA, say 2004 to 2014, 140 million people have been lifted out of poverty. So in terms of quantity, the number of people who are poor has reduced. That's the difference. Number two, poverty today is not the abject poverty that we saw 25, 30 years ago. That was abject poverty. For example, in South Indian temples, if you walk to a temple 25, 30 years ago, you will find on either side of the road or the steps to the temple, people sitting with little plates, and it was considered part of your religious duty to put a half an anna or an anna on the plate. Begging was rampant. In fact, I remember my mother would carry coins. Many of you may not have seen those coins. Quarter anna, half anna, and 1 anna. And you would put it on the plate. Today, I don't see them sitting on either side of the road or on the steps as we climb up the hillock to the shrine. Abject poverty is not there. Children have better teeth. I don't know if you've noticed it. I first contested an election in 1984. Most children have had terrible teeth. Today, children have better teeth. Why? Because they are eating better, they're brushing their teeth, and perhaps a portion of them are even accessing dental care. You don't find that emaciated child's belly anymore. Except in parts of Orissa and parts of Bihar, you don't find that anymore. If you go to a village, if there is a function or a program, you find everyone is turned out in their best clothes. Girls are with ribbon and flowers. Boys are wearing their best clothes. I mean, 25, 30 years ago, most of those children will be with running noses and half naked, and there was nothing to clothe the child with. Clearly, it is visible. The visible change is there. It's not no longer abject poverty. There is poverty. Undeniably, there is poverty. But there is not abject poverty as we saw it 30, 40 years ago.
Thank you, sir. There is another question about the new monetary policy committee that's been formed. Do you think it'll reduce the powers of the RBI governor? What do you think?
No, it won't. In fact, I'm happy that the government accepted a formula which I had mooted in my column when there was a standoff between the Reserve Bank and the government. The government wanted 4 out of 7 members or 4 out of 6 to be nominated by government. RBI wanted 4 out of 6 or 7 to be nominated by the RBI. And there was a dispute whether the governor wanted a veto. I wrote a column saying government should nominate 3, RBI should nominate 3, and the governor should not have a veto, he should have a casting vote. Now, ultimately, government seemed to have accepted that formula. Maybe they did not know that I had mooted the formula. They might have rejected it if they had known about it. But that is the formula which has been accepted now. It doesn't reduce the power of the governor. On the contrary, it imposes a great responsibility on the governor. I'll tell you why. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the 3 government nominees will vote one way. Let's assume that the governor and his 2 nominees will vote the other way. Now today, the governor has to either convince one of the government nominees to change his mind, or the government's nominees must convince one of the RBI's nominees to change his mind. Otherwise, the governor has no option but to exercise his casting vote. Now I ask myself, how many times will monetary policy be made by the casting vote? No governor will want to make monetary policy every time by a casting vote. So there is a mandatory requirement built into the system that both sides have to convince each other. There has to be more deliberation, more discussion, more data. And that is why the first meeting of the Monetary Committee unanimously decided to reduce the rate by 0.25%. And I think this is very healthy. Monetary policy committees are the norm all over the world. I'm happy that we have a monetary policy committee. I mooted it in one of my budget speeches a few years ago. I'm finally happy that it has come to play. This imposes a great responsibility on every member to try to convince the other members.
Sir, do you find an adequate culture of continuity in the Indian policy ecosystem? Do you think there is adequate continuity in the policies despite changes in government?
It's unavoidable. Whatever you say in the opposition, when you come into government, you have to become more responsible. For example, the present government, and this is not a criticism, this is simply a statement of fact. The present government is on record saying Aadhaar will be abolished when we come to power. Aadhaar is without statutory authority. Aadhaar is an invasion of privacy. When we come to power, Aadhaar will go. In government, they are doing the exact opposite. They are spreading Aadhaar to everything. Number 2, both Mr. Narendra Modi, when he was the chief minister, and Ms. Sushma Swaraj, as the leader of the opposition, said, the rupee is trending above the finance minister's age. When we come to power, it will be 40 rupees to a dollar. Today, nobody speaks of 40 rupees to a dollar. If the rupee was 40 rupees to a dollar, India's economy will collapse overnight. Nobody is talking about 40 rupees a dollar. You ask Sushma Swaraj or Mr. Narendra Modi, what happened to your 40 rupees a dollar promise, they will perhaps put up a weak smile and turn away. Nobody's even encouraged to ask that question anymore. Therefore, I think in opposition you can say a number of things. But when you come to government, for example, Maganrega now, Prime Minister on the floor of the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, Mr. Rangarajan is here, said, this is a monument to the failure of the previous government. Maganrega is a monument of shame. It is a monument to the failure of the previous government. Today, Maganrega is one of the planks on which they are addressing rural distress and drought-like situations. But when you're in opposition, you can say a number of things. When you're in government, the GST is the best example. The best example is GST. Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh led the opposition to GST. Then the other states joined and Tamil Nadu joined. Today, the government, led by the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, is the pioneer and say, we want GST. It is the Congress which was opposing GST. Well, that's the beauty of democracy. Eventually, you'll have to hug the middle road.
Sir, we have recently seen the Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam talk about universal basic income. Do you think that's a good way to subsume all subsidies?
Absolutely. I think he is referring to the same thing that I referred to. Universal basic minimum wage. You can't assure a universal basic income. I think you're quoting him wrongly. It's a universal basic minimum wage. Everybody in this country who puts in 8 hours of work, irrespective of whatever work he does, must have that universal basic minimum wage.
Thank you, sir. Recently, we have seen the GST Council deciding on the tax slabs for GST, the 4 different tax slabs. What is your take on that?
It's too early for me to form an opinion. I want to see the fine print of their decision. From what appears in the newspapers, they have decided on slabs like nil rate, 5%, 12%, 18%, 28%, and then a sin tax at about 60% and plus cesses. I think there is room for improvement. I think there is a lot to be desired in that higher rates. There is a very, very well-argued editorial in the Hindu today. I have not yet read the editorials in the other papers. I think there is still room for improvement. I agree that initially you will have more than one rate. In fact, in my speech in Parliament, I said you must have a standard rate, a standard minus, and a standard plus. Then, of course, there will be 0 rate. So even at the bare minimum, I can understand 4 rates. But I cannot understand 6 rates plus cesses. I think there is still scope for improvement. But I have not come to a final view on the matter. I will take a final view after I study the matter more carefully.
Sir, could you please comment on the reforms necessary in the bureaucratic system of India?
Well, you cannot run a government without a civil service. And world over, the civil service is the backbone of the government. But the civil service is like a horse. A horse is only as good as a rider. If the rider has command over the horse will take him where he wants to go. But if the rider has no control over the horse, ultimately the horse will throw him off the saddle. Civil service has its usefulness, it has its drawbacks also. Civil service must be focused on implementation, which requires, in this century, specialization. You must have people who are deeply imbued with the knowledge and skills necessary, say, to run a public health system, or an education system, or the railways, or aviation, or road building. Unfortunately, we have too many generalists in the service and too few specialists, number one. Number two, the civil service does not give enough opportunity for him to upgrade his skills. Imagine you are an IIT graduate. If your engineering skills remained frozen with the knowledge that you acquired in 2016, even 30 years later, you'll be a very poor engineer. See, we celebrate the integrated coach factory. It is a good industry. But have you compared the carriages and compartments that are built in Perambur with, say, what is built in China and Japan? They are technologically decades ahead of us. Now, why are these engineers not able to build a compartment or a carriage equal to the quality of a carriage in Japan or China or Europe? because they have not been given the opportunity to upgrade their skills, and new technology has not been inducted. So I think what is important in the civil services, we need more and more specialists, and we need to constantly upgrade technology. See, technology will change at a faster pace. The pace of change is not going to be the same. The pace of change over the next 25 years will be several times more than the pace of change over the last 25 years. As engineers, you will understand what I'm saying. It will accelerate. The pace of change will accelerate. It will not be the same pace. It's not as if the change car will drive at 40 miles per hour. It will drive initially at 20 kilometers per hour, then it will accelerate to 30, to 40, to 50, and it will accelerate. The pace of change over the next 25 years, in my view, will be several times more than the pace or the rate of change over the last 25 years. And therefore, bureaucracy must be equipped to handle that rate of change, which I'm not sure they are today.
Sir, do you support lateral entry of professionals into the government?
Of course, why not? I support lateral entry. I also support lateral exit. People must be allowed to come in and go out. There must be a permanent civil service. In fact, the bulk of the civil service will indeed be from appointment to retirement. That's not unusual. But you must give enough levels at which a certain number can enter and a certain number can exit. That is the only way to bring in new thinking into this system.
Sir, we have another question about special economic zones. There is a feeling that the special economic zones in India have not taken off as well as they have in China.
Absolutely correct. Because we distorted the idea of a special economic zone. I opposed what we are doing here. China has maybe 6 or 8 special economic zones, large ones. They are virtually islands in China with different set of laws. We have created a building as a special economic zone. One building is a special economic zone. Our special economic zone is not driven by the enhanced infrastructure, the different laws, and the competitive environment. Those are the drivers of a special economic zone. Our special economic zones were driven only by one consideration: how to get the tax concession. That is why even a single building has been declared a special economic zone, which is why our special economic zones have failed. They just became tax shelters.
Sir, when we developed in India, as we are developing, we are sort of directly jumping to a service sector-led economy.
That's inevitable. That's inevitable. If China can make firecrackers more cheaply and safer than your cracker, Chinese crackers will come to India. That's inevitable. Unless you develop competitive edge in the production of goods, you cannot out-compete other producers of goods. Why are we becoming a service economy more than an industrial economy? Because we have acquired a competitive edge in providing services. Therefore, Make in India will succeed only if Skill India succeeds. And Skill India will succeed only when your education standards meet the world's education standards. So if you want to become an industrial economy, you cannot say, this is what I produce, and therefore you consume it. Nobody will consume it today. You have to produce goods which are equal to the world's goods. Because we produce services which are equal to or better than the world's services, our economy is fast becoming a service economy. But we can reverse it only if you invest in education, especially technical education, research, development, skilling the Indian worker, and then making in India and for the world. We seem to be going the wrong way. You start with make in India. What can you make in India unless you are able to compete with what is made in China or made in Korea or made in Finland or wherever? You have to make in India what is equal to or better than what is made in the rest of the world.
Sir, recently there has been a lot of talk about the non-performing assets. Do you agree with the idea of the government infusing capital in banks that are laden with a lot of bad loans?
No, government should continue to infuse capital. You see, banking is a peculiar business. I don't know how many of you understand the nature of the banking business. See, if I put today 100 crore, I can set up a textile mill. And I can continue to run that textile mill with 100 crore. Simply by improving processes, getting some balancing equipment, I can continue to produce with just 100 crore. Banks, unfortunately, can't grow unless there is more capital, because there is something called a capital adequacy reserve, which a bank must maintain. Say, for simple understanding, if I must lend 100 rupees, I must have a capital of 10 rupees. A reserve of 10 rupees. I have lent 100 rupees. Now you come to me asking for a loan of another 10 rupees. I can't lend unless I find one more rupee capital. So if a bank has to grow, it must constantly augment its capital, because there are norms which require a bank to have a capital adequacy ratio, maintain a ratio. So banks must continue to have more and more capital if they want to lend more and more. So government, if it is the majority owner, in order to retain its majority ownership, it must put in capital. There's no other way. If government today is a 60% owner, if you need 1,000 rupees more capital, government must put in 600 rupees, and otherwise government share will come down. Therefore, government must infuse capital. Secondly, retained earnings. Profits can be retained. So infusion of capital is not something which is new. It is a continuing process. The problem about NPAs is, when there is an economic downturn, you will have NPAs. We had a worse situation of NPAs in 1997 and 1998. Nearly 40% was NPA. We are nowhere near that today. But I think the government has completely lost the plot. The answer to NPA is to empower the banker, empower the professional banker, and leave it to him to sort it out over a period of time. Instead of that, the government has issued threats. It has indulged in strong-arm tactics, and it has set up a completely useless board called the Banking Board Review or something like that. A completely useless fifth wheel of the car. None of this is going to work. Today, no banker is willing to take risks. The answer to NPA is to empower the banker and tell him, you take your decision. We will support you, but take a professional decision. And give him time. That is the way to solve the NPA, not the present way. Actually, this NPA situation has worsened since 2014, because I think the government is going about it the wrong way. I've written about it, I think, in the last column or so. How to tackle NPA is to empower the banker, not to set up this useless banking revenue board and to threaten bankers. If you don't resolve the NPA, it's like telling a doctor, if you don't get this patient ready, by next week, how can you do that kind of thing?
Thank you very much for your answers, sir. I'm pretty sure our students got much better insights.
I now request Professor Umakant Dash to felicitate the speaker with a memento. We request everyone to stay in their seats. We express our deep gratitude to Shri P. Chidambaram for giving us this opportunity to have him with us today. Sir, it was indeed a pleasure hosting you here. I now request Shri P. Chidambaram to leave a message for IITM in our EML yearbook. I now request everyone to stand up for the national anthem. We request everyone to stay back till the speaker leaves.